They broke my arms for fun," she cried, left to die in the snow outside a mining town. But when a quiet Amish farmer opens his door, her life takes an unimaginable turn. Inside his humble cabin, he binds her wounds and whispers prayers of mercy. Outside, angry boots pound the frozen ground, voices roar, "Harbor her, and you'll pay." She's not just a wounded woman. She carries her father's deed to the river meadow, the land every miner wants, the land they'll kill to control. And the only man standing between her and the mob is bound by vows of peace, not violence. As the church bell tolls and the sheriff's hand hovers over the law, the question rises like smoke in the cold night. Will compassion and truth be strong enough to face a town built on greed, hatred, and blood? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter wind howled through the darkened streets as Evelyn stumbled through knee-deep snow, her arms hanging useless at her sides. Each step sent waves of agony through her broken bones. Behind her, raucous laughter echoed from the saloon where the miners had left her crumpled in the drift. "Savage squaw," one had sneered, twisting her arm until the crack echoed in her ears. The memory made her stomach heave. She forced herself forward, fighting against the black spots dancing in her vision. The town's windows glowed with lamplight, but no doors opened. No help came. She saw curtains twitch shut as she passed, townspeople turning away from her suffering. The cruel wind cut through her thin dress, numbing her fingers and toes. In the distance, a single light beckoned through the swirling snow. It seemed impossibly far, but it was her only hope. Evelyn pushed onward, tears freezing on her cheeks. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Stay strong, my daughter. The Creator gives us strength when we need it most." The simple cabin grew closer with each faltering step. Smoke curled from its chimney, promising warmth within. But her vision was growing dark around the edges. Her legs finally gave out just as she reached the rough-hewn door. With the last of her strength, Evelyn lifted her hand and let it fall against the wood. The weak thumping seemed lost in the howling wind. She slumped against the door frame, consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. Inside the cabin, Sebastian Esch sat before his fire, a well-worn Bible open on his lap. The words blurred before his eyes as memories of his dear Rachel flooded his mind. 2 years had passed since he'd lost her in childbirth, yet the wound still felt fresh. He'd come west seeking solitude, a place to heal. The soft thudding at his door barely registered at first, but something in the rhythm spoke of desperation. Sebastian set aside his Bible and crossed to the door, lamp in hand. Cold air rushed in as he pulled it open. His breath caught at the sight of the young woman collapsed in the snow, her dark hair frosted with ice. Even in the dim light, he could see how her arms hung at unnatural angles. "Dear Father in heaven," he whispered, setting down his lamp. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms as gently as he could. She whimpered in pain despite his care. Sebastian carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. He laid her on the rug before the pot-bellied stove where the heat was strongest. Her skin felt like ice beneath his fingers as he checked her pulse. Weak but steady. "Rest easy," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "You're safe now." He worked quickly, stoking the fire higher and gathering blankets. As he wrapped them around her shivering form, he took stock of her injuries. Both arms were clearly broken, and angry bruises were forming on her wrists and face. The sight made his stomach clench with anger. Anger he quickly pushed aside. Rage would not help her now. Sebastian knew some healing from his years among the Amish. His mother had been their community's midwife, and she'd taught him about herbs and setting bones. but this would require more skill than he possessed alone. Still, he could make her comfortable and warm. He heated water and mixed in herbs for pain, yarrow and willow bark that he'd gathered last summer. With gentle hands, he lifted her head and helped her drink a few sips. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, dark and filled with fear. "Peace," Sebastian said softly. "No one will harm you here." He touched her shoulder lightly, trying to convey safety through the gesture. She watched him for a long moment before her eyes slid shut again. Her breathing gradually steadied as the herbs began to work. Sebastian sat back on his heels, studying her face in the firelight. She was young, probably no more than 20 summers. Apache by her features and dress. His heart ached at the thought of what she must have endured to end up at his door. "Lord," he prayed quietly, "guide my hands. Help me bring healing to this child of yours." The wind continued to rage outside, but within the cabin, peace settled like a blanket. Sebastian kept vigil by the fire, watching over his unexpected guest as snow drifted past the windows and the night deepened toward dawn. He knew there would be consequences for helping her. The town viewed Indians with suspicion and hatred, but as Sebastian looked at the young woman's battered face, he felt the rightness of his choice settle in his bones. Whatever came, he would not turn away from someone in need. Sebastian reached for his brass lantern, adjusting the wick to cast more light. His weathered hands moved with practiced gentleness as he examined Evelyn's broken arms. The damage made his heart ache. Both limbs had been twisted with cruel force, leaving ugly bruises darkening against her copper skin. "I must set these properly," he murmured, more to himself than his semi-conscious patient. He gathered his supplies, straight willow branches he'd stored for basket making, and strips torn from his old work shirts. The familiar motions of preparing splints helped calm his racing thoughts. Evelyn's eyes flew open as he touched her right arm. She tried to pull away, a small cry of pain escaping her lips. "Be still," Sebastian soothed, his voice low and steady. "I mean you no harm. The bones must be set to heal straight." He kept his movements slow and deliberate, letting her see everything he did. Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough with pain and fear. "I am Sebastian Esch. I am Amish. My people believe in peace. We do not carry weapons or fight." He carefully aligned the first broken bone, trying to cause as little additional pain as possible. "We live simply and follow God's ways." Evelyn watched him with wary eyes as he worked, but she was too weak to resist. Sebastian wrapped the willow splints with practiced care, securing them with strips of soft cotton. When he finished with both arms, he helped her sit up enough to sip from a bowl of warm broth. "Rest now," he said, adjusting the blankets around her. "You are safe here." Though suspicion still lined her face, exhaustion soon pulled her under. She drifted off to sleep beside the pot-bellied stove, its warmth keeping the bitter cold at bay. Dawn broke clear and cold. Sebastian stepped outside to chop more firewood, his axe biting rhythmically into the frozen logs. As he worked, he prayed aloud, his breath forming clouds in the morning air. "Lord, grant me wisdom to help this child of yours. Give me strength to do what is right, no matter what others may say. Guide my hands to bring healing, and help me show her your love through my actions." Inside, Evelyn had woken. Through the window she watched the strange white man pray to his God while he worked. It puzzled her. He spoke to the Creator with such familiarity, yet so differently from her people's ways. There were no drums, no sacred songs, just quiet words from his heart. When Sebastian came in, stamping snow from his boots, he found her sitting up, wrapped in blankets. He set about making a simple supper of beans and cornbread, filling the cabin with warm, homey smells. You should stay until your arms heal, he said as he served her a bowl. It will take several weeks at least. Evelyn frowned. The town will not like that. They hate my people. What others think matters less than doing what is right. Sebastian's voice was quiet but firm. This is my home. You will be safe here. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. The miners. They attacked me for no reason. I was just walking past the saloon. They called me names, twisted my arms until they broke. No one helped. No one even looked at me. Sebastian's hands tightened on his bowl, but his voice remained gentle. What they did was wrong. Here, you will not be harmed. You have my word. Evelyn studied his face in the lamplight, searching for any sign of deception. She found only sincere concern in his steady gaze. For the first time since the attack, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. Thank you, she whispered, the words feeling strange on her tongue. She wasn't used to trusting white men, but something about Sebastian's quiet strength and gentle hands told her he spoke truth. Sebastian simply nodded, respecting her need for silence. He added another log to the stove, its warmth wrapping around them like a protective embrace. As night settled over the cabin, Evelyn felt herself beginning to accept that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found shelter in more ways than one. The second morning dawned crisp and clear. Sunlight streamed through Sebastian's cabin windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. Evelyn sat propped against pillows at his small wooden table, her splintered arms resting carefully in her lap. Though pain still pulsed through her broken bones with each heartbeat, she could at least hold herself upright now. Sebastian moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency, his stockinged feet nearly silent on the plank floor. He set a steaming cup of herbal tea before her, then adjusted the table's height with a wooden wedge. Here, he demonstrated, lifting the cup with one hand. If you turn just so, you can sip without needing to grip. His large hands were surprisingly delicate as he helped position the cup near her lips. Evelyn managed a small sip, the warm liquid soothing her throat. Thank you, she murmured. Outside, snow began to fall in lazy spirals, coating the window glass in intricate patterns of frost. Sebastian settled into the chair across from her, his own cup warming his palms. Something in the peaceful morning seemed to loosen his usual reserve. I wasn't always here in the West, he said softly, eyes distant. I had a life in Pennsylvania, among my people. A wife named Sarah. Evelyn watched his face, noting the shadow of old pain that crossed it. She died, he continued, bringing our first child into the world. Neither survived. His voice grew rough. After that, grief ate at me like rust on iron. I couldn't bear the sympathy in everyone's eyes, the empty quiet of our house. I came west seeking peace, or perhaps just escape. The land can heal, Evelyn offered quietly. My father believed this. He would take me to high meadows when sorrow weighed heavy, let the wind and sky work their medicine. Sebastian looked up, meeting her eyes. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Evelyn's fingers traced patterns on the wooden tabletop. He dreamed of peace between our people and the settlers. Said we could learn from each other if we opened our hearts. She swallowed hard. He died still believing that. They sat in companionable silence as the snow fell thicker outside. Their shared grief hung between them like a bridge, connecting their separate worlds. As evening approached, Sebastian lit the lamps and settled in his chair by the fire. He picked up a worn leather harness that needed mending, his needle flashing in the lamplight. Almost unconsciously, he began to hum, the sound growing into a low, melodic hymn. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," he sang softly, his deep voice filling the cabin's corners with warmth. "That saved a wretch like me." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the unfamiliar words wash over her. In her mind, she heard her father's voice raised in Apache songs, prayers for healing, for wisdom, for the earth's blessing. The two melodies seemed to weave together in her memory, different yet harmonious, like streams joining to form a river. But beyond their peaceful shelter, trouble was stirring. Earlier that day, Mrs. Peterson, wife of the general store owner, had been walking past Sebastian's cabin. Through the window, she'd spotted a distinctly feminine silhouette, one with the unmistakable copper skin of an Apache. By midday, she'd shared her discovery with the minister's wife over tea. By afternoon, the blacksmith's apprentice was telling anyone who'd listen that he'd seen smoke from the Amish man's chimney at odd hours. "Ain't natural," Tucker Jones drawled, leaning against the saloon's bar. "Man living alone, taking in one of them savages." His words slurred slightly. He'd been drinking since noon. "Heard tell those Amish folk are peculiar anyway," another man added. "Don't believe in fighting. Don't even carry guns." The whispers spread through town like wildfire, growing more twisted with each telling. By nightfall, what had started as curious gossip had taken on darker tones. "The Amish man harbors a savage," people muttered, behind closed doors and over fence posts. But inside the cabin, Sebastian and Evelyn remained unaware of the growing storm. The hymn faded into silence, leaving only the crack of the fire and the soft whisper of needle through leather. Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the world in pristine white, while darkness gathered at the edges of their lamplight. Evelyn watched Sebastian's steady hands at work, remembering how gently those same hands had tended her wounds. In the peaceful quiet, she felt something unfamiliar taking root in her heart. Trust fragile as a spring seedling, but growing stronger with each passing hour. Heavy boots crunched through snow as dusk settled over the cabin. A sharp knock rattled the wooden door, making Evelyn flinch where she sat near the stove. Sebastian rose slowly from his chair, setting aside the harness he'd been mending. The knock came again, harder this time. "Open up, Amish." Sebastian's eyes met Evelyn's for a moment. "Stay calm," he said softly, then moved to answer. Two miners stood on his threshold, their breath clouding in the cold air. Evelyn recognized them from the gang that had attacked her, Tucker Jones and Bill Mason, their faces red from drink and cold. "Heard tell you're keeping Indian company." Tucker sneered, trying to peer past Sebastian's shoulder. "That thieving savage who's been stealing from the mining office?" Sebastian remained planted in the doorway, his broad frame blocking their view. "The woman in my care is injured and healing." "Nothing more." Bill spat into the snow. "Injured, eh? Probably hurt herself running from the law. Hand her over. We'll see she gets proper justice. She is under my protection," Sebastian said, his quiet voice carrying steel beneath its calm. "Good evening to you both." With that, he firmly shut the door in their faces. Muffled curses filtered through the wood, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. Evelyn's whole body trembled, her splintered arms aching from tension. "They'll be back," she whispered, "with more men." Sebastian nodded gravely. "Perhaps." He moved to stoke the fire, adding another log. "But you are safe here tonight." As darkness settled fully, Sebastian positioned his rocking chair near the window. A lit lantern sat ready on the sill, casting warm light into the yard where fresh snow fell. Near the woodpile, he'd propped his axe, not as a weapon, for his people shunned violence, but as a tool that might serve if needed. Evelyn watched him from her bed of quilts near the stove. "Your people truly never fight?" "We believe in peace," Sebastian said, his eyes on the darkness beyond the window. "But we also believe in protecting those in need." He glanced at her with a small smile. "Sleep now. I'll keep watch." Morning brought pale sunlight and the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Sebastian, who had dozed only briefly in his chair, straightened as a horse and rider emerged from the trees. "Deputy Clark," he murmured, recognizing the man's badge glinting in the sun. The deputy dismounted, brushing snow from his coat. His knock was sharp, official. When Sebastian opened the door, Clark thrust a folded paper toward him. "Got a warrant here," the deputy announced, loud enough to carry through the cabin. "That Apache woman you're harboring is wanted for theft of documents from the mining company office. Hand her over peaceful-like." Evelyn's heart seemed to stop. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Sebastian, her protector, who would now have to surrender her to jail. But Sebastian didn't move from the doorway. "What documents is she accused of stealing?" "Land deeds, survey maps." Clark's hand rested meaningfully on his gun belt. "Mining company claims she took them 3 days ago." 3 days ago. Sebastian's voice held a note of surprise. When she lay here with broken arms, unable to even feed herself? The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "That's not my concern. I have a warrant." "Wait here," Sebastian said firmly. He closed the door, crossing to a wooden trunk beneath his bed. From its depths, he pulled out a leather folder, weathered with age. Evelyn watched through her tears as he returned to the door, opening it to face the deputy again. "Perhaps you're looking for this," Sebastian said, drawing out a yellowed document. "A legal deed to the meadowland by the river, filed 15 years ago by John Running Water, Evelyn's father. He claimed it properly through the territorial office, before the mining company existed." The deputy's face darkened as he scanned the document. The seal was official, the signatures legitimate. This complicated matters. "Where did you get this?" Clark demanded. "John Running Water entrusted it to my predecessor, the previous owner of this cabin. He knew the mining companies were coming, wanted it kept safe." Sebastian's voice remained steady. "The deed is legal. The land belongs to his daughter." Clark stood silent for a long moment, mouth working as if chewing on bitter words. Finally, he folded the warrant and tucked it away. "This isn't over," he growled. "Mining company won't take kindly to this news." He turned and mounted his horse, spurring it perhaps harder than necessary as he rode away. Sebastian closed the door softly, turning to find Evelyn staring at him with wide eyes. "My father's deed," she whispered. "All this time." Fresh tears fell, but these were different. Tears of hope, of revelation. Her father's dream hadn't died with him. It lived on in that weathered document, in the land he'd legally claimed for his people's future. Sebastian carefully returned the deed to its folder. "Now we know what we're truly fighting for," he said quietly. "Not just your healing, but your rightful home." Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's frosted windows as Sebastian tended the fire. Evelyn sat propped in her chair, watching him move about the small space with careful precision. Her arms ached less today, though the splints still felt strange against her skin. "There's something you should know about the deed," Sebastian said, settling into his chair across from her. Steam rose from the cup of willow bark tea he'd prepared to ease her pain. "Your father didn't give it to me directly." Evelyn's dark eyes fixed on his face, questioning. Years ago, before I arrived here, your father met an Amish trader named Jacob Yoder. Sebastian continued, his voice gentle. They formed an unlikely friendship. Your father knew the mining companies were coming, pushing west. He wanted to protect the meadow, your family's land. I remember Jacob, Evelyn said softly. He traded fair with our people, spoke kindly. Sebastian nodded. Your father entrusted the deed to Jacob for safekeeping. When Jacob grew too old to stay on the frontier, he passed it to me, along with this cabin. He paused, watching understanding dawn in her eyes. The meadow has the cleanest water source for miles. The miners want it for their operations. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her cup. That's why they attacked me. They thought I had proof of our claim. Anger and grief mingled in her voice. My father died, believing that paper would keep our land safe. He was right, Sebastian said firmly. He moved to check her splints, his touch careful as he adjusted the bindings. You're healing well. Your strength amazes me. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but worry still shadowed her eyes. What good is strength against so many who hate us? In town, that hatred was indeed brewing. The saloon buzzed with angry voices as miners gathered, passing whiskey and bitter words between them. That Apache witch has no right to our water. Tucker Jones slammed his glass down. And that Amish fool protecting her, they both need teaching. Bill Mason nodded darkly. Reckon it's time we showed them what happens to folks who stand in the way of progress. Let's gather the boys. Another miner growled. Run them both out, or worse. Outside the saloon's grimy windows, Miss Sarah Collins, the young schoolteacher, hurried past. Her heart pounded as she caught fragments of their violent plans. Instead of heading home, she turned towards the church, her steps quick in the muddy snow. Back at the cabin, Sebastian stood at the window, watching the sun sink toward the western hills. We can't hide here forever, he said quietly. Tomorrow we must go into town, show them the deed openly. Truth fears no light. Evelyn's face paled. They'll kill us both. No. Sebastian's voice held steady conviction. There are good people in town too. They just need courage to stand up. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she looked down at her splintered arms. Why do you risk so much for me? I'm just a broken Indian woman. Does your God even see someone like me? Sebastian crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. His weather-worn face was gentle, but serious. Yes, he said simply, especially you. How can you be so sure? Her voice barely reached above a whisper. Because he led you to my door that night. Sebastian answered, and he gives me strength each day to help you heal. He adjusted a loose strand of her dark hair with fatherly tenderness. The same God who knows every star by name knows every pain you carry. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting his words sink deep. The quiet faith in his voice reminded her of her father's prayers, sung to the dawn. Different words, different tongues, but perhaps reaching toward the same light. What if I'm not strong enough? She asked. Then we'll be strong together, Sebastian replied. That's what community means, bearing one another's burdens. A log settled in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, carrying the first hints of spring beneath winter's chill. Evelyn looked at her splintered arms, then at Sebastian's steady presence beside her. Tomorrow, then, she said quietly. We'll face them with the truth. Sebastian nodded, relief and pride warming his eyes. Together. In town, Miss Collins slipped into the church as evening shadows lengthened. Pastor Matthews looked up from his desk, surprised by her urgent entrance. "Pastor," she said breathlessly, "there's trouble brewing. The miners, they're planning violence against Sebastian Esch and that poor Apache woman he's helping." The pastor's lined face grew grave as she relayed what she'd overheard. When she finished, he reached for his coat. "Thank you for coming to me, Miss Collins," he said. "It seems God has given us important work to do." Dawn broke cold and clear that Sunday morning. Sebastian hitched his horse to the wagon while Evelyn stood in the doorway, her splintered arms crossed against her chest. She watched him work, anxiety tightening her throat. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Sebastian adjusted the horse's harness with steady hands. "The truth needs telling," he said simply, "and Sunday is the day for it." He helped her into the wagon, tucking warm blankets around her legs. The rough boards creaked beneath them as they set out, hooves crunching through fresh snow. Evelyn sat rigid, her back straight despite the pain in her arms. Each bump in the road sent jolts through her healing bones. As they approached town, early churchgoers turned to stare. Women pulled children closer, men's faces hardened. Evelyn felt their eyes like physical weight upon her skin. Sebastian guided the wagon past the general store, where a cluster of miners stood smoking. Their hostile gazes followed the wagon's progress. The white clapboard church rose before them, its bell tolling across the valley. Sebastian helped Evelyn down, his hand gentle but firm on her elbow. She stumbled slightly, unused to walking with bound arms. His steady grip kept her upright. "Hold your head high," he murmured. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." At the church steps, whispers rustled like dead leaves. "The Indian woman," someone hissed, "and Sebastian Esch, bringing her here of all places." "Ain't right," another voice muttered. "This is a Christian house." Sebastian's hand settled on her shoulder, warm through her shawl. He guided her forward, past the shocked faces, through the church doors. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath their boots. Evelyn had never been inside the building before. Her people worshipped under open sky. The walls seemed to press close around her. They settled into a back pew as the congregation shuffled and murmured. The pastor's eyes widened slightly at their presence, but he composed himself and called for the opening hymn. "Amazing Grace" filled the small space, voices rising in familiar harmony. Evelyn didn't know the words, but the melody touched something deep within her. It reminded her of her father's songs, reaching toward the same divine mystery through different paths. Sebastian's low voice joined the others, steady and sure beside her. When the hymn ended, Sebastian squeezed her shoulder gently and stood. "Pardon me, Pastor Matthews," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I have something that needs sharing with the congregation." The pastor hesitated, then nodded. Sebastian walked to the front, removing a folded paper from his coat. Evelyn's heart pounded as she recognized her father's deed. "This document," Sebastian began, "was entrusted to me by a fellow Amish trader. It's a legal deed, signed and witnessed, showing that Thomas Running Water claimed the meadowland by Lost Creek 5 years before any mining stakes were laid." He unfolded the paper, its corners worn but text still clear. "I'll read it now if I may." The congregation sat silent as Sebastian's steady voice filled the church, reading the formal language that proved Evelyn's father had rightfully claimed the land. She watched faces change as understanding dawned, some showing surprise, others darkening with anger. "That paper's worthless," someone shouted from the back. "Indian claims don't hold." "The law says different," Sebastian replied calmly. "This deed was filed proper, registered with territorial authorities. The land belongs to Thomas Runningwater's heir, his daughter Evelyn. Whispers erupted like prairie fire. Evelyn felt exposed under their stares, but something else burned in her chest. Pride, fierce and bright. Her father's foresight, his faith in justice, had not been in vain. Pastor Matthews raised his hands for quiet. "Let us pray," he said, though his voice shook slightly. "Lord, guide us toward your peace in this matter. Help us see past our differences to do what's right." Some bowed their heads. Others sat stiff-necked, faces hard with resistance. When the prayer ended, Sebastian returned to Evelyn's side. Together they walked out into the pale winter sunshine. Townspeople gathered in knots on the church steps, voices low but intense. A few, including Miss Collins, the schoolteacher, nodded as they passed. Others turned away, muttering darkly. The miners who'd been smoking earlier were gone, leaving only cigarette butts in the snow. But Evelyn didn't hunch or hurry. For the first time since the attack, she held her head high. Sebastian's solid presence beside her felt like a shield, not of weapons, but of truth. They climbed into the wagon together, dignity wrapping around them warmer than any blanket. As they drove home, Evelyn watched the town recede behind them. The church spire stood stark against the blue sky, marking a place where, for better or worse, truth had been spoken aloud at last. For 3 peaceful days after the church confrontation, quiet settled over Sebastian's cabin like fresh snow. Morning light streamed through frosted windows as Evelyn stood at the small wooden table, determination etched on her face. Her right arm, though still splintered, had begun to heal enough for simple tasks. She gripped the teapot's handle carefully, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Steady now," Sebastian encouraged from his chair by the stove. "Let your wrist guide it." The stream of tea wavered but found its way into the cup. A triumphant smile lit Evelyn's face. "I did it. Indeed you did." Sebastian's eyes crinkled warmly. He returned to his worn Bible, fingers tracing the familiar verses as lamplight danced across the pages. The evening hours had become a gentle routine, him reading while she practiced small victories of healing. "Would you like to learn some Pennsylvania Dutch?" he asked, closing his Bible. When Evelyn nodded, he taught her simple phrases. "Good morning, thank you, God bless." "Danke," she repeated softly, the foreign word clumsy but earnest on her tongue. Her shy smile made Sebastian's heart lift. These quiet moments felt like grace itself, a respite from the storm they'd weathered. But peace proved fragile as spring ice. Just after sunset on the 4th day, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Sebastian opened the door to find Joe Miller, a rancher from the North Valley, sitting anxious on his horse. "Evening, Sebastian." Joe twisted his hat in weathered hands. "Felt I ought to ride out. Warn you proper. Them miners been talking wild at the saloon, plotting some kind of payback for that deed business at church. Mean to run you both off, sounds like." Sebastian's face remained calm, though his shoulders tensed. "Much obliged for the warning, Joe." The rancher nodded, already turning his horse. "Watch yourself, friend. Them's dangerous men when riled." After Joe rode away, Sebastian stood in the doorway, gazing at the darkening sky. His voice rose quiet but firm in prayer. "Lord, grant us wisdom for what's coming. Show us your path through this valley." Evelyn sat by the fire, its flames casting shadows across her troubled features. "I fear this will only lead to more violence," she said softly. "My people know too well how such conflicts end." Sebastian crossed to warm his hands by the hearth. "Yes," he agreed. "But remember, light shines brightest against darkness. God's truth doesn't dim just because men rage against it." Evelyn studied his face in the firelight, finding strength in his steady faith. They sat together in companionable silence as evening deepened into night, each lost in prayer and thought. Dawn broke grey and cold. Sebastian woke to an unusual quiet, the familiar sound of running water missing from outside. He pulled on his boots and coat, stepping out into the bitter morning air. Evelyn joined him on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. Together they listened to the strange silence where Lost Creek should have sung its morning song. "The water," Evelyn whispered. "Something's wrong upstream." Sebastian's face grew grave. "I hear hammering. Come, we'd best see what's happening." They followed the creek's course, frost crunching beneath their boots. The sound of pounding grew louder as they approached the bend where the water curved down from mining territory. There, in the pale morning light, stood a crude dam of logs and packed earth. A dozen miners worked with axes and shovels, driving more posts into the creek bed. The once flowing water had slowed to a trickle. Sebastian's fields lay downstream, as did Evelyn's meadow. Without the creek's flow, both lands would soon wither. One of the miners spotted them and called out with mock cheerfulness, "Well, if it ain't the Amish man and his Indian friend," admiring our handiwork. "This is wrong," Sebastian said firmly. "The creek feeds all our lands. You have no right to dam it." "Right!" Another miner spat. "That paper you waved in church don't mean nothing out here. This is mining territory now. Water goes to them that can hold it." Evelyn stepped forward, her splintered arms crossed. "The law. Law!" The first miner laughed harshly. "Law's a long way off, woman. Might want to think about that before making more trouble." Sebastian placed a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder, turning her away from the miner's dark looks. They walked back to the cabin in heavy silence, the sound of hammering following them like thunder. Inside, Evelyn sank into a chair, her face drawn with worry. "Without water, the meadow will die. All my father worked for." Sebastian stoked the fire, his movements deliberate and calm, despite the tension in his shoulders. "We won't let that happen," he said quietly. "There are always choices beyond violence. We just have to find them." But as morning crept toward noon, the creek's voice grew fainter and fainter, until only a whisper of water remained where once it had flowed strong and free. Sebastian and Evelyn hurried along the frozen creek bed, their boots crunching through fresh snow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the white ground, but offered little warmth. As they rounded the bend, they found the stream choked with a crude barrier, rough-cut logs and heavy stones piled high, leaving only a thin trickle of water seeping through. Evelyn stopped short, her splintered arms drawing tight against her chest. This place held precious memories. Her father teaching her to fish here, showing her how to read the water's patterns, explaining how the creek gave life to everything downstream. Now the barrier stood like an ugly scar across that sacred space. "The fish," she whispered, voice tight with grief. "They came here every spring. My father would catch them, thank them for feeding us. Now they cannot pass." Sebastian studied the dam with worried eyes. 5 miners worked nearby, adding more logs to their structure. Taking a deep breath, he approached them, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Friends," he called out, though his tone suggested he knew they were anything but. "This creek feeds all our lands. Surely we can find a way to share the water fairly." The biggest miner, a man with a red beard and cold eyes, turned with a mocking grin. "Well, look who's back, the peaceful man and his Indian girl." He stepped closer, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Ain't nothing to discuss. Water's ours now." "The law says different," Sebastian replied calmly. "That deed Before he could finish, the miner's thick hands shot out, shoving Sebastian hard. He stumbled backward, landing heavily in the snow. The other miners laughed. "Law's ours out here." Redbeard sneered, standing over Sebastian. "Best remember that, plain man." Sebastian rose slowly, brushing snow from his dark coat. Though his hands must have ached to defend himself, he kept them loose at his sides. "Violence solves nothing," he said quietly. "God sees what you do here." The miners only laughed harder. "Your God ain't watching this creek, friend. Best take your savage and clear out while you still can." Evelyn stepped forward, anger flashing in her dark eyes, but Sebastian gently touched her arm. Together they turned away from the sneering men and walked back towards the cabin. That evening, Evelyn sat by the stove, despair settling heavy in her chest. The cold made her broken arms throb despite the splints. She watched Sebastian tend his bruises with arnica salve, his movements careful but unstrained. "How can you stay so calm?" she asked. "They mock your faith, steal our water, push you down like a child. Yet you don't fight back." Sebastian settled into his chair, wincing slightly. "Fighting would only prove them right about us, that we're savages who solve problems with fists." His voice remained steady, though his eyes showed pain. "Truth will prevail if we endure. God's justice moves slower than man's violence, but it never fails." Evelyn wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at her heart. The hours crept by like wounded things. As midnight approached, the temperature plummeted, making the cabin's logs creak and pop. Then came the sound they'd dreaded, angry voices approaching through the dark. Heavy boots crunched on snow. Sebastian rose, positioning himself between Evelyn and the door. The door burst inward with a spray of splinters. 4 miners rushed in, rifle butts raised. Redbeard led them, eyes gleaming with cruel purpose. "Time's up, plain man," he growled. 2 men grabbed Sebastian's arms, dragging him toward the door despite his struggles. "No!" Evelyn tried to rise, but her splintered arms made her clumsy. She could only watch helplessly as they hauled Sebastian into the yard. The sound of the first blow made her flinch, the dull thud of a rifle stock against flesh. Sebastian grunted but didn't cry out. Another strike knocked him to his knees in the snow. Evelyn screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like a wounded animal's cry. She stumbled to the doorway, desperate to help but unable to lift her arms to fight. The miners worked with terrible efficiency, their rifle butts rising and falling in the dark. Blood sprayed across white snow with each impact. Sebastian curled into himself, offering no resistance even as they broke him. "Stop!" Evelyn begged, her voice raw. "Please stop." But the miners showed no mercy. They continued until Sebastian lay motionless in the bloodied snow, his plain black coat now torn and crimson. Only then did they step back, breathing hard in the frozen air. Redbeard spat near Sebastian's still form. "That's what happens to Indian lovers round here." He turned his cold gaze on Evelyn. "He ain't dying yet, but next time we won't be so gentle. Clear out, both of you." The miners melted back into the darkness, leaving only their boot prints in the snow, and the broken man they'd punished for showing kindness to an Apache woman. Evelyn fell to her knees beside Sebastian, tears freezing on her cheeks. His face was barely recognizable through the blood, but his chest still rose with shallow breaths. Snow continued to fall, turning red where it touched him, while Evelyn knelt helpless beside the one person who had dared to stand between her and hatred's violence. Evelyn's heart pounded as she knelt beside Sebastian's crumpled form in the snow. Her splintered arms screamed in protest, but she couldn't leave him to freeze. Gritting her teeth against the pain, she hooked her elbows under his shoulders and began to drag him toward the cabin door. "Please," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Please, help me save him." Each backward step was agony. The splints restricted her movement, and Sebastian's dead weight pulled at her healing bones. But inch by inch, she managed to drag him across the threshold. Sweat froze on her forehead despite the bitter cold. Inside, she guided his limp body as gently as possible to the floor near the pot-bellied stove. The fire's warmth did little to ease her fear as she saw his injuries in the lamplight. Purple bruises bloomed across his face, and dried blood matted his hair. Moving quickly despite her limitations, Evelyn filled a pot with clean snow and set it to boil on the stove. She tore strips from her skirt with her teeth, creating makeshift bandages. When the water was ready, she soaked the cloth and began dabbing at his wounds, cleaning away blood and dirt as best she could with her restricted movement. Sebastian groaned but didn't wake. His skin felt cold to her touch, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. Evelyn had seen men die from less severe beatings. Fear clutched at her throat. "Great Spirit!" She prayed in Apache, using the words her father had taught her. "Guard this good man's path. Do not let him walk the shadow road tonight." The familiar words brought comfort, connecting her to memories of her father's strength. As she worked through the night, she began humming softly, the hymn Sebastian had sung while mending harness leather. Though she didn't know the words, the melody carried peace. She wove it together with an Apache healing song, the two traditions blending in the quiet cabin. Hours blurred into days. Evelyn dozed in short bursts, always jerking awake to check Sebastian's breathing. She kept the fire stoked, heated broth when she could, and prayed constantly. Sometimes she spoke to him, telling stories of her father's meadow, hoping her voice might guide him back to consciousness. Through the cabin window, she could see the creek growing weaker each day. The miner's dam remained, choking the water to a trickle. Without the creek's flow, the winter grass in her father's meadow would die, and Sebastian's fields would wither come spring. On the fourth day, Sebastian's eyes fluttered open. "Evelyn!" His voice came out as a cracked whisper. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm here," she answered, taking his hand with her least injured arm. "You're alive." He tried to sit up, but fell back with a grimace. "The miners." "Rest," she said firmly. "You're too weak to move yet." Over the next few days, Sebastian slowly regained strength. Evelyn helped him take small sips of broth, clean his wounds, and eventually sit up against the wall. But when he attempted to walk across the cabin, his legs buckled beneath him. "I'm sorry," he said, frustration clear in his voice. "I cannot even stand properly." Evelyn looked out the window at the distant creek, where the illegal dam still stood. The miners had won for now, using violence to steal what rightfully belonged to others. Sebastian had tried to fight them with peace and truth, and they had nearly killed him for it. A new feeling stirred in her chest, not fear or despair, but something stronger. She thought of her father's courage, of Sebastian's unwavering faith, of her own survival against hatred. Perhaps it was time for her to stand, even with broken arms. "You showed me that truth is stronger than fists," she said quietly. "Now I must find a way to prove it." Sebastian watched her with concern in his bruised face. "What will you do?" Evelyn straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of her father's legacy and Sebastian's trust. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know I must act. You risked everything to protect me. Now it's my turn to fight, not with violence, but with the strength you taught me." She looked down at her splintered arms, then back to the weak man who had defended her without throwing a single punch. Their shared suffering had awakened something in her spirit, a courage she hadn't known she possessed, a faith that felt both old and new. The dying creek called to her like her father's voice, reminding her of promises and rights that no amount of brutality could erase. She would find a way to restore justice, to honor both her Apache heritage and the gentle strength Sebastian had shown her. But first, she had to help him heal. She adjusted his blanket and added wood to the stove, knowing that whatever path lay ahead would require both of them to be strong. Dawn painted the frost-covered town in pale gold as Evelyn made her way down the muddy street. Her shawl, borrowed from Sebastian's trunk, wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the morning chill. Her splintered arms ached with each careful step, but she kept moving forward, focusing on the white church steeple that rose above the town's wooden buildings. Townsfolk stopped in their tracks as she passed. A woman yanked her child inside a shop. Two men paused their conversation to stare openly. Evelyn felt their eyes like physical blows, but refused to lower her gaze. Sebastian had taught her that dignity came from within, not from others' approval. The church steps loomed before her. Evelyn paused, drawing a deep breath. The last time she'd climbed these steps, Sebastian had stood beside her. Now she faced them alone. One by one, she mounted the stairs, her boots leaving wet prints on the wood. Inside, the church felt cavernous and cool. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. Pastor Matthews looked up from his desk near the pulpit, his eyes widening at her unexpected appearance. "Miss Evelyn?" He stood, uncertainty clear in his voice. Evelyn walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing. When she reached the front pew, she turned to face him directly. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to speak. "Does your God approve of cruelty, Pastor Matthews?" Her voice quivered, but grew stronger with each word. "Does he smile when good men are beaten for showing kindness? When water is stolen from rightful owners?" The pastor's face flushed. He gripped the edge of his desk, unable to meet her steady gaze. "No," he said quietly. "He does not." "Then why?" Evelyn's words carried the weight of generations of injustice. "Why did you stay silent when the miners attacked Sebastian? When they built their dam against the law?" Pastor Matthews sank heavily into his chair. "Fear," he admitted. "Cowardice. The miners hold much power here." He looked up at her, shame evident in his expression. "But you are right. Scripture demands mercy and justice for all God's children." "My father believed peace was possible between our peoples," Evelyn said, her voice softening. "He dreamed of a day when Apache and settler could share the land with respect." Sebastian shares that dream. He nearly died defending it. The pastor stood again, running a hand through his graying hair. "Wait here," he said suddenly. He hurried to the church door and rang the bell, 3 sharp peals that cut through the morning air. People began filtering into the church, curious about the unexpected summons. Their whispers filled the space as they saw Evelyn standing near the pulpit. Some seemed ready to leave, but Pastor Matthews raised his hands. "Brothers and sisters," he called out, his voice carrying authority. "We have failed in our Christian duty. We have allowed evil to prosper through our silence." He gestured to Evelyn. This woman's father legally claimed the meadowland. "We all saw the deed, yet we stood idle while others used violence to steal what is rightfully hers. We watched as Sebastian Esch, a godly man, was beaten for showing Christ's love to a neighbor." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Evelyn saw faces change as the pastor's words struck home. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. A shopkeeper hung his head. Evelyn stepped forward, her splintered arms visible to all. "I do not seek revenge," she said clearly. "Like my father, I seek only justice and peace. The creek waters should flow freely, as the Creator intended. There is enough for all if we share with honor." A rancher near the back spoke up. "The miners' dam is illegal." "We all know it. been too scared to say it, but it's true. We should have helped Sebastian when he stood up to them, added another voice. Man's done nothing but good since coming here. More voices joined in, conscience awakening after too long sleeping. The pastor nodded in approval as plans began forming. A group would ride to the territorial judge, others would document the miners' violations, several offered to help care for Sebastian as he recovered. Evelyn stood still amid the rising energy of purpose, hardly daring to believe the change occurring before her. For the first time since the attack, she felt something beyond fear and pain. These people were seeing her not as a savage, but as a person worthy of justice. They were choosing to stand for what was right, even if it meant facing the miners' anger. An older woman approached her, touching her arm gently. We've been poor neighbors, dear. That changes today. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, but she held them back. Her father had believed this possible, that hearts could change, that mercy could overcome hatred. Perhaps his dream hadn't died with him after all. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting rainbow patterns through the church windows, Evelyn felt the first stirrings of real hope. Her weakness had become strength, her pain had opened eyes, and her voice had awakened sleeping consciences. The path ahead would not be easy, but she no longer walked it alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the creek bank as Evelyn led Pastor Matthews and 24 townsfolk along the muddy path. Her splintered arms throbbed with each step, but determination drove her forward. Behind her, boots squelched through spring mud and voices murmured prayers and encouragement. At a bend in the creek, they found the crude dam. Rough-cut logs and heavy stones choked the water's natural flow, creating a murky pond upstream while leaving the creek bed below nearly dry. Near the structure, 3 miners stood guard with rifles, their faces darkening at the approaching crowd. "Clear out!" one miner shouted, raising his weapon. "This here's mining company business!" Pastor Matthews stepped forward, his Bible clutched firmly in one hand. "This is God's water, flowing through legally deeded land. We've come to see justice done." More miners emerged from the tree line, their faces twisted with anger. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she refused to step back. The deed in her pocket, carefully copied by the schoolteacher, felt like a shield. "Sheriff's been summoned," called out Mr. Henderson, the general store owner. "Best wait before anyone does something foolish." Minutes stretched like hours as both groups stood their ground. The morning breeze carried the scent of wet earth and pine, reminding Evelyn of days spent here with her father. He had loved this place, teaching her the creek's moods and seasons. Hoofbeats announced Sheriff Reeves' arrival. He dismounted slowly, taking in the scene with weary eyes. His badge caught the sunlight as he approached. "Quite a gathering," he drawled, thumb hooked in his gun belt. "What's the trouble here?" "These folk are interfering with company operations." The lead miner spat. "We got water rights." "That's false," Pastor Matthews declared. He gestured to Evelyn. "Show him, child." With trembling fingers, Evelyn withdrew the deed copy. The sheriff took it, eyes narrowing as he read. She watched his expression change from skepticism to resignation as he recognized the territorial seal and dates. "This deed's proper," Sheriff Reeve announced finally. "Filed 15 years back, before any mining claims. The water rights belong to the landowner." He turned to the miners. "That dam's got to come down." The miners erupted in curses. "You can't." "I can and will." The sheriff cut in sharply. "Law's clear on water rights. Either you dismantle it peaceful-like, or I'll deputize these good folks and do it by force." The gathered townsfolk stepped closer, their numbers making the miners' weapons seem suddenly inadequate. After a tense moment, the lead miner lowered his rifle with a bitter oath. "Fine. Boys, tear it down." The miners worked grudgingly, but other hands joined in. Mr. Henderson and his sons helped shift the heavy stones. The pastor's teenage boy scrambled atop the logs with rope. Even the sheriff put his shoulder to the work, proving his words with action. Evelyn stood watching, tears blurring her vision as each piece of the dam was pulled away. The creek responded eagerly, water finding its old paths, gathering speed. When the last log was dragged clear, the current rushed through with a joyful surge, spreading out to fill the familiar channels. "Look there," whispered Mrs. Baker, the seamstress, pointing downstream. The water flowed swift and clean into her father's meadow. Spring grass, thirsty from weeks of drought, seemed to lift its blades toward the life-giving stream. A pair of deer, startled by the noise, bounded away through the fresh green growth. "Your father would be proud," Pastor Matthews said softly, standing beside Evelyn. "He believed in peace through justice. Today proves his wisdom." The miners slunk away, leaving their tools behind. Sheriff Reeve tipped his hat to Evelyn before mounting up. "Land's yours, miss. Law'll back you if there's more trouble." As the sun began its westward slide, the townsfolk gathered around Evelyn. "Let's see you home safe," Mrs. Baker said warmly. "Sebastian will be wanting to hear the news." They walked together through the lengthening shadows, a dozen people flanking Evelyn like an honor guard. Their chatter and laughter filled the cooling air. A few women discussed bringing meals to help during Sebastian's recovery. Mr. Henderson offered to check the creek daily until things settled. Evelyn's arms ached fiercely from the day's tension, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The creek song followed them up the trail, a melody of restoration and hope. Her father's dream lived on in the water's flow and in the hearts of people who had chosen to stand for what was right. Sebastian's cabin came into view, lamplight glowing in its windows like a beacon of welcome. The sight brought fresh tears to Evelyn's eyes, tears not of pain or fear, but of gratitude. Here she had found healing, friendship, and the courage to fight for justice. Now, with the creek restored and the town's support behind her, she could finally begin to believe in the peace her father had always promised would come. Sebastian rested in his wooden chair by the stove, a quilt draped across his lap. Though his face remained pale, some color had returned to his cheeks. Evelyn sat beside him, carefully stirring a pot of broth as she recounted the events at the creek. "The water rushed back like it remembered its own path," she said softly, "just like my father always described it." Sebastian's eyes shone with pride as he listened. "You were the strong one," he whispered, his voice still rough from his injuries. "God worked through your courage when I could not stand." Evelyn dipped a spoon into the steaming broth, bringing it carefully to his lips. Her splintered arms made the task awkward, but she persisted, glad to care for the man who had once tended her own wounds. Sebastian accepted each spoonful with quiet gratitude. As days passed, winter's grip began to loosen. Patches of earth emerged through melting snow, and icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves. Though her arms remained bound, Evelyn insisted on helping with the animals. She scattered feed for the chickens and filled water troughs, managing despite her clumsiness. Sebastian watched from the doorway, taking slow, determined steps around the yard as his strength returned. One evening, they sat by lamplight after supper. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls as Sebastian mended a bridle strap, his movements still careful but growing steadier. "I've been thinking about the meadow," Evelyn said, breaking their comfortable silence. "When summer comes, I want to plant corn there, like my father did. The creek will keep it strong." Sebastian nodded, setting aside his work. "I can see it already. The stalks growing tall in the sun." He paused, something wistful crossing his face. "You know what I miss most about my old life?" The sound of children laughing. "My wife and I always dreamed our home would be full of little ones." "Perhaps it will be again," Evelyn said softly. Different than before, but just as blessed. Their words hung in the warm air between them, weaving together like threads of possibility. No longer were they merely healer and patient, but two souls sharing dreams of tomorrow. The lamp flickered gently, casting its light on their hope-filled faces as they spoke of gardens to plant and fences to mend, each vision a step toward their shared future. The morning sun spilled golden light across the meadow as Sebastian and Evelyn made their way along the creek bank. Sebastian leaned on a carved oak staff, his steps measured but growing stronger each day. Beside him, Evelyn flexed her fingers and rotated her wrists, marveling at the simple freedom of movement now that the splints were finally gone. Her arms were stiff, but whole again. "Still sore?" Sebastian asked, watching her stretch. "Yes, but it feels good to move them," Evelyn replied, bending to touch the soft, dark soil. "The earth is ready for planting." They carried bags of seed corn, stopping every few paces to scatter the kernels in neat rows. Evelyn showed Sebastian how her father had done it, measuring the spaces between plantings with careful steps. The creek burbled nearby, its voice strong and clear since the dam's removal. The sun climbed higher when they heard footsteps approaching. Evelyn tensed for a moment, but these were different from the angry stomps of miners. Mrs. Miller, the school teacher, appeared first, carrying a large basket covered with a checkered cloth. Behind her came the baker's son with a shovel over his shoulder, and the cooper's wife bearing her own bag of seed. "We thought you might want some help," Mrs. Miller said, setting down her basket, "and some fresh bread and preserves to keep your strength up." More townspeople arrived, some carrying tools, others bringing seeds or food. Even the pastor came, rolling up his sleeves to help turn soil. They worked together under the warming spring sky, Apache wisdom guiding the planting while Amish patience set the pace. Sebastian watched as Evelyn showed a young girl how to plant corn the way her father had taught her. The child listened intently, her small hands mimicking Evelyn's movements. Nearby, two men who had once turned away from Evelyn's broken body now worked alongside her, their faces soft with shame and newfound respect. The meadow rang with quiet conversation and the sounds of shovels turning earth. Here, where violence had once threatened to tear everything apart, healing took root instead. Apache traditions and Amish ways blended naturally, like the mingling waters of tributary streams flowing into one river. By midday, the field was transformed. Neat rows stretched toward the creek, promise buried in each careful mound of soil. The townspeople shared food and stories, their circle widening to include both Sebastian and Evelyn as naturally as spring thaws winter's ice. Evening settled softly over the cabin as the last rays of sunlight faded. Fresh snow began falling outside the window, each flake catching the golden glow from within. Sebastian added another log to the hearth, its warmth spreading through the room like a gentle embrace. The familiar crackle of burning wood filled the comfortable silence between them. Evelyn sat in the rocking chair Sebastian had carefully adjusted for her comfort during her recovery. Her fingers, now free of splints, traced patterns on the worn wooden armrests. The memory of pain had faded, replaced by something deeper, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her father's passing. Without thinking, she began to hum an Apache melody, one her father had sung during winter evenings, much like this one. The song spoke of renewal, of spring waters breaking free from ice, of hope returning after long darkness. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger as the familiar words carried her back to those cherished moments. Sebastian listened, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Then, gently, he joined in with an Amish hymn he'd learned as a child. The two melodies wove together in the warm air, her song of nature's rebirth harmonizing with his prayer of thanksgiving. Though the words were different, the spirit behind them was the same: gratitude, healing, and the promise of tomorrow. The dancing flames cast their shadows on the cabin walls as their songs merged and flowed. When the last notes faded, Sebastian turned to Evelyn, his face soft with emotion. "You know," he said quietly, "when I came here, my faith was like that creek when it was dammed, blocked, barely flowing. But watching your courage, seeing how you faced darkness with such grace—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You've healed more than just my injuries. You've restored my belief in God's purpose." Evelyn's eyes glistened in the firelight. "And you," she replied, her voice tender. "You healed more than my broken arms. When those miners left me in the snow, I thought my spirit was as shattered as my bones. But you showed me kindness when others showed hate. You gave me shelter when others cast me out." She touched her healed arms gently. "You mended more than just these." Outside, snow continued falling, each flake a tiny blessing from above. The firelight glowed warm against the window panes, holding back the deepening night. Within the cabin's walls, two hearts beat stronger for having been broken and healed together. Their future stretched before them like the newly planted meadow, rich with promise, ready for growth, no longer overshadowed by the pain of the past. The fire crackled softly, as if in agreement, as they sat together in peaceful silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the quiet wisdom of their healed hearts. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.